Okay, so welcome everybody. Welcome this evening to our first North at Trent lecture series this year. North at Trent's a series of lectures that we hold every year to discuss interesting and topical themes with regard not just the Canadian North, but in many times with regard to the entire circumpolar region. And that, of course, is of relevance this evening as we welcome our first guest, who I'm going to introduce in a moment. But I want to thank both, I'm Heather Nicol, the director of the Frost Centre for Canadian Studies and Indigenous Studies and the School for the Study of Canada. And I want to thank Kathy Scholl, who is our administrative assistant for the Frost Centre for Canadian Studies and Indigenous Studies, who artfully puts together every year, and this year without fail as well, our North at Trent lecture series. It's always surprising amount of work. But I also Kathy and all the work she's done, and again, the support of various programs in the Frost Centre itself. I also this evening want to thank Trent International Programs and Kate Logan, who couldn't join us in person tonight, but Trent International Programs has also been instrumental in bringing Lassi here this evening, as he'll be talking to and has been talking to both undergraduate and graduate students at Trent. So before we start, the first thing I'd like to do is to acknowledge, we respectfully acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of the Mississauga and Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to the First Nations for their care of and teachings about our earth and our relations. May we honor those teachings. I think it's particularly important to start with a land acknowledgement because of the relationship that all of us have come to learn about and discover when we work in Northern Canada, but also throughout the circumpolar world. So I would like to introduce to you this evening our guest speaker. The main event, we'll put it that way, Lassi Heininen, University of Lapland. Lassi is a professor emeritus of Arctic politics at the University of Lapland. He's the editor of the Arctic Yearbook, and we'll talk more about the Arctic Yearbook in the course of our discussion tonight. He's the chair of the traveling symposium, the Kalot Academy, which we'll talk more about this evening as well. He's the leader of the University of the Arctic's thematic network on security and geopolitics and security, And his research fields include international relations, geopolitics, security studies, environmental politics, Northern European studies, and Arctic studies. And Lassi is well known to anybody who works within the circumpolar region. He has been an influencer, he's been a mentor, he's been a professor, he's been a scholar, prolific scholar, and certainly someone who has built tremendous education knowledge infrastructures for the rest of us who follow. And so Lassi, welcome this evening. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you for your kindness. Yeah. It's my pleasure and honor to be here.
When we get together, we always talk. We have great long conversations. At least I think they are. Hope you do too. And we thought that maybe this evening it might be fun rather to stand Lassi up at a podium with a PowerPoint going, that we might have a conversation. And I have some questions for Lassi. And then I think we'd like to invite you to ask questions of Lassi as well after we've finished with some few set questions we have. And my rationale for doing it this way is that there's so much knowledge and wisdom, and what we can learn from Lassi is usually found not just in the PowerPoint, but also in the conversation. And I think this gives us an opportunity to really have a wonderful learning experience this evening. And starting with questions that you might not normally, Lassi might not normally share in a PowerPoint. or a traditional academic presentation. And so, Lassi, I really wanted to start tonight to ask you, because it's a fascinating story about your own journey. How did you get started and interested in the circumpolar north? Where did it all begin for you?
Yeah, indeed. That is something what I thought earlier that there is no need for me to go back, but recently there are more and more issues which are coming up and reminding me that actually why I started to become interested in the Arctic region or the circumpolar north is very much dealing with nuclear weapons and arms control and nuclear disarmament, because that is what I was working for. And like my MA thesis when I graduated from University of Tampere, Finland, was all about nuclear disarmament and NATO's nuclear weapon policies. And so that was at that time very relevant. And the time was the end of the Cold War period. So that was exactly mid-1980s. What is now said that was the last peak where the tension was really high of the Cold War period. Just big when it started to go down and when you started to have detent and political stability was increased. So, I mean, I was lucky enough to be taken as a young researcher into an international study program, which was dealing with disarmament, development, sustainable development, and the Arctic. So this was the start for my career to start to become interested in Arctic regions.
Yeah, and the start of another phase in the Arctic as well.
Well, exactly, yeah. And I mean, we were there when we started the project. That was only a few months before Mikhail Gorbachev, the last president of the former Soviet Union, had his speech in Murmansk, the very famous Murmansk speech, where he made several initiatives. So we were there listening that, and we realized, oh, this is something very new. And so it was real momentum, and then we took that momentum and started to do many things.
Yeah. And that leads me really into my second question, which is you've been involved in the study of governance and security and geopolitics in the circumpolar international north for decades, and since Murmansk, if not before. Since the early years, really at the start of this new cooperation. Can you tell us how that cooperation, more fully, how that cooperation came about? How did that end up shaping the sort of regionalization and region building that followed? And then what was Canada and Finland's role in that?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, we started that project. We collected the researchers, mostly political scientists, not only, but mostly from Canada, USA, Nordic countries, and the Soviet Union, because it was the Soviet Union at the time. And then, so of course, that was between scholars, first of all. But in the very beginning, we realized that it is so important to listen to civil servants, policymakers, maybe not politicians per se, but civil servants, or at ministries, first of all, foreign ministries. So, and that's what we did. And when having, for example, seminars in Finland, we always invited someone from the Foreign Ministry of Finland. So, and it happened to be that Finland at that time was looking for a new kind of initiative. And that's why they were very curious to be involved in and listen what we were talking about. But it was not only Finnish authorities, also civil servants of the Foreign Ministry of the Soviet Union from Moscow. They attended our seminars. And there are some connections to Gorbachev's policies. They were silent, these guys. They made notes all the time, notes. And when they went back to home, and then we could find, after some months, some outcomes of these, what we were talking about in our seminars. And that was fascinating because that was really interplay between science and politics. What we are saying that it's so important. Well, it is, but it's something new. I mean, it has been done earlier, but the point is that you have to do it, you have to implement it. So, yeah, Finland was there active and Canada. So, of course, we knew that Canada was already having some kind of proposal idea of an Arctic Council, but Finland was faster. And that was something that Canada was not so happy with. Because Finland made an initiative for the Arctic Environmental Protection Strategy, late 1980s, taking that from the Gorbachev speech, one of the initiatives. So Finland made that, and then Canada was, of course, involved in. But so for us, Canada and Finland were very important because they were really open toward these ideas. And then it was easy to communicate with them because you could have someone who we are not only interested in to listen, but could contribute in our discussions. Because that was also what we wanted to have, not only free dinners or lunches, but also someone who can contribute and say something from the policy side, that how they look. And I think Finland and Canada played a very important role at the time.
And what sorts of ideas were you sort of kicking around there that had traction? I mean, what were the kind of, what would you say was one of the issues that everybody was able to start agreeing on?
Well, it was certainly something dealing with the environment. And of course, we know now that it was about environmental protection, like the strategy is all about, but it was a bit more. It was something which is a field of so-called low politics, where you can exactly agree on. And so what really happened was to start functional cooperation on one or two fields. But then another thing was, and this is directly dealing with the military, and that is nuclear safety. Nuclear safety became a big issue in second half of 1980s in the northernmost part of the Atlantic Ocean, the Barents Sea, the Norwegian Sea. I mean, and it was something what the governments were not really ready for to cooperate, but there were like the Sami, who we are very interested in because they became very concerned on the quality of their waters and air. And so they were saying that this is very important. Of course, there was a Chernobyl accident, but it's not only Chernobyl, it was also accidents of nuclear submarines. You had several of those in these waters. So, and then we scholars, we started to study, that was my theme for a long time, and then some environmental movements. So all in all, these non-state actors started to push governments to do something. So that was absolutely, I would say that nuclear safety was the niche. That became so important politically. And where all these actors and states could agree. And then the cooperation was naturally deepening.
And how did that cooperation then shape the Arctic Council?
Well,
Maybe you could go over what that is.
well, yeah, I mean, Arctic Council, like I said, there was this Canadian idea earlier that was a little bit different, but then became realized in mid-1990s. Canada played their instrumental role when it was established in 1996. I think that it was very important that these non-state actors became active before it was established, because then it was very innovative structure, because it was not only that the 8 Arctic states became the members, but it was also that indigenous peoples' organizations, 6 of them became permanent participants. And actually, I have to say, because I followed that very closely at the time, it was very much because the Arctic indigenous peoples were so clever. They demanded to become involved in these negotiations in the very beginning of the Arctic environmental protection strategy already. And so they were already there when the Arctic states started to negotiate about to establish the Arctic Council. So the 6 indigenous peoples organizations, well, we are here around the same table, so you should take us, and that happened. So, I mean, I would say that the Arctic Council would be totally different without the background where you had these non-state actors active.
Yeah. Okay, and we're going to I think we'll come back to the Arctic Council in a minute or two, but maybe just flashing forward a little bit, Lassi, you and Karen and Barbara and a number of folks worked on a project a couple of years ago in which you studied closely the Arctic states and their politics and approaches to the North and their foreign policies. And thinking about the Arctic Council and cooperation and how that formed up some years earlier. When you think about Arctic states, again, today, and the kinds of priorities and policies that you explored, what themes and policies and approaches that you explored, what would you say their priorities are now?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that I have done, I'm that scholar who has done the most of these analysis of these policies and strategies, and that is because in the very beginning, one of my students did his MA thesis on that, and I had to know something about the policy if I would supervise him. So and then I decided, well, okay, why don't I write something for policymakers, as I did for the parliamentarians of the Arctic states. And that was exactly when the last country, Sweden, adopted their own policy. This is already 10 years ago. But then came out exactly that it's not enough. So we have to go deeper. And then came our analysis and synthesis. I was at the time at the International Institute for Applied System Analysis in Luxembourg, Austria. And we did that. We went through 56 paper documents, not only the policies, strategies of the Arctic states, but also observer states, which is observer states of the Arctic Council, which means those non-Arctic states who would like to become more involved in, like China, Japan, from Asia, Germany, France, UK, from Europe. So indeed, we are trying to analyze not only what are the official priorities, but also analyzing carefully what is what is the real priorities there. So how the documents are written. So how much room there is for one thing or comparing another thing. So the outcome was that yes, international cooperation is very important, and then governance, of course, because there are people living in the Arctic region, but then it's economic activities. And when we did the real synthesis on that, so the conclusion was that there is this kind of ambivalency between the rhetorics saying that environmental protection is very important and vis-a-vis the reality where they would like to support economic activities. But they are not able to make the final decision, which one. And that is something that they are hesitating in a way. They can't, it's some sort of political inability to make the choice. And that was something that really we have not discussed it earlier. That was real finding. And like it has been, I mean, the state representatives, they have known that for 2 years now. And none, I haven't heard anything who would say that, no, it's not true. They are silent. But I mean, if it wouldn't be true, then they would protest, say, no, it's not. In our case, this is not our policy. But because it is simply the fact that it's not in a way explicitly said, but it's implicitly there. And that was the idea, exactly, to try to find out and read between the lines. And so this was maybe the most striking finding.
So I wonder, sort of to kind of talk a little bit about those findings, and then your, and this is one of Lassi's most recent books with Heather Exton-Pirro, a colleague, Climate Change and Arctic Security, Searching for a Paradigm Shift. You've argued in that book for a change in security paradigms. It sounds somewhere like that kind of research you were doing was informing that, and you've argued for a change in security paradigms and the way we approach the circumpolar north. And I was going to ask you, in light of what your findings were in that the study of the, and then in your thinking in your book, what do you mean by a paradigm shift? And what does that idea mean, and why is that needed?
I mean, this is maybe in my research career, maybe the most important question to me, and maybe also at the same time the most difficult. It's a real challenge. Because if I'm saying that we need a paradigm shift, then of course that means that I'm responsible to find a way to make a shift, how to make it. And I know that I'm the first to say that it is needed, but also the first to say that it's really difficult. And okay, so why it is needed? So I don't know how many of you have followed news in this week when something is happening in Sharm el-Sheikh, in Egypt. There is the COP27 summit between all the possible states of the United Nations talking about climate change. So, it was striking to me to see the first pictures in the opening day. What is behind there, the podium? What is written there? It's some kind of sort of slogan, but what is the most important word in the slogan? That is implementation. So after 26 or so years, they finally realized that it's all about implementation. And so the same is here with the shift of a paradigm shift on security. It is that we have to take seriously that security it has not been for a long time anymore about the military or weapon-oriented security, not even state-centered security. No, it's about comprehensive security. It's about the environment. It's about people. It's people-centered approach what we should have here. But I mean, maybe some policymakers are even agreeing. Yeah, that is true. We have to broaden. But the problem is simply that if the mainstream paradigm of security is that it's all about the military, it's all about national security based on weapons. So how come you can have a shift there? And so, but first, of course, you have to argue that why it is not anymore the proper understanding of security. It is very narrow, that someone is attacking you from outside, I mean, outside of your borders. Well, climate change is exactly attacking you from outside, but it doesn't matter what are the borders or where are the borders. Because I mean, it will go through the whole society. It doesn't matter how strong is your army, like we know. But I mean, these things, we know these things. I mean, I would, like 20 years ago, that was simply, at that time you had to argue that this is like this. Nowadays, I think that it's no need to argue anymore, but simply that shift is not done. And so this is what I mean, that there is absolutely a need for that. If you look or listen what Secretary General of United Nations is saying, poor guy, he tries to do the job what the heads of the state should do, but he doesn't have power, but he tries his best, but he's not in charge of security of any state.
Why do you think it's so hard? I mean, why is it so hard for human security? Why is it so difficult for people to grasp?
Well, because people still think, I mean, they hesitate to redefine themselves as actors of security or owners of security. So, because they think that there is some kind of elite there, well, I call it the national security elite. Each country, each state has this kind of elite, which is the elite of the elites. And like in Finland, I can't even name all the members of that elite because it's not transparent at all. But in the end of the day, they define what is the security interest of Finland, and the same in other countries. So, I mean, because people, it's too abstract for people to realize that, no, I have to say something. Or actually, I know rather much about my own security. But they okay, maybe it's not my role. Maybe I don't know enough or something else. And then we easily leave that to the elite. And the elite would like to mystify security. They like that because they know that by mystifying security is the best way to keep it in their hands. So and they think that they have some kind of very superior, exceptional knowledge about security. Well, I have to say they don't have. There are many others who know better about what we should do here. Because the security, I mean, what are those real risks and threats for everyday security? They are a little bit different what they used to be earlier.
Yeah. I'm thinking, as you're talking about, building the Great Wall that was supposed to be built by so-called security elites who do better along the southern border of the U.S. But you and I have talked a lot, and this is just a quick question, but based on your conversations with people that work in traditional security, and do you think that that apart from the group that is somewhat misguided in their understanding of security, the actual operators and security actors and agencies, do you think that they see security as traditional still, or do you think that they understand the shift?
Well, yeah, I think that they understand that there is a need for shift, and the smart ones are saying that we have tried to broaden it and the scope and so on, and that's good. But I mean, one thing is that they don't necessarily know that it is something what two United Nations reports we are writing out already in early 1980s. I mean, they did excellent job, and there at that time we were talking about there was a discourse on the rich north and the poor south, and about developments before sustainable development actually was there, was about equality in development and about poverty and all these things and development. So it was very important to put together issues like development, peace, meaning and war, security in general, and then the environment. And then they launched this idea of comprehensive security, exactly having this holistic approach. So it was already there, I mean, almost 40 years ago. And I mean, the point is, now, like I have tried to say, that it's good to know, but the real point is how to apply that to this current situation. And that's not really happening. And it's partly because United Nations is not appreciated so much. There are block building very much going on. It's not only NATO, but it's also many other blocks which they build. But they forget that institution where you have almost all the states involved in. And that institution, United Nations, has done excellent job on launching these kind of new ideas.
So if we can come back, because that's interesting, and I'm just thinking too, if we can come back to think about the Arctic Council again and think about this changing understanding of human security, which is, arguably, it's becoming more and more acceptable that there are many kinds of securities nowadays. But as you say, how to implement that. So when we go back to the beginning, the Arctic Council, in all of its understanding of the need for environmental cooperation and threat, absolutely prohibited discussion of traditional security. And why did they do that? Why did they decide not to include security as an area of cooperation? And what do you think that meant for security and geopolitics over the years till we get to today? Do you think that was a wise? Or not?
Well, I mean, yeah, that is the famous footnote in the Ottawa Declaration. But I mean, I think that it was wise at the very beginning, because, like I said earlier, the idea was to find a field of low politics where you can agree. And environmental protection was that. Because, I mean, environmental protection or climate change was not politicized at the time. Climate change is very politicized now. It's not militarized, but it's politicized, which is a positive thing, I think. But at that time, it was some kind of neutral field. And that's why because otherwise they wouldn't agree. I mean, all the Arctic states wouldn't agree. But then, of course, what happened was that it became a taboo. That I mean, if someone said that we should discuss about security, then there was always no, we cannot. Well, and then in a way, what happened was that then they blocked that kind of discussion, how to define security, or what does it mean that maybe you should redefine security. And because at the same time, they were talking about many issues dealing with human security. But in a way, they tried to avoid to use that human security because there was this security. This is another way to mystify security in a way. But maybe that was simply that they wanted to avoid that kind of situation that someone would disagree. But then of course, I mean, now when we think about today, the situation, then of course, maybe it would be better to have some kind of open discussion about that, how we all that at least ask how you define security. And what you mean? I mean, would you take that broad scope or not? Or would you like to keep that very traditional in a way to have that kind of discussion and then what kind of conclusions you have? At least then they wouldn't make that as a taboo. So, but I mean, of course, then on the other hand, climate change was there, and even the interesting thing is that even nuclear safety was there in the documents in 1990s, early 2000. But remember, this is nuclear safety. There is safety, not security. It's not nuclear security. And I mean, like in Finnish language, we have only one word for that, what is in English language, security and safety. So, and that was one way to avoid that kind of discussion. So nuclear safety is fine for all, but then if you would use the term nuclear security, then no, we can't talk about security. And so I don't want to blame that anyone was planning this. No, it simply happened because you were not open to discuss about that. And maybe now there are some outcomes, some legacy of that kind of taboo.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah. On the other hand, we know that right now the Arctic 8 are on pause because Russia is the chair of the Arctic Council. And at this particular point in time, there's a total unwillingness to go forward with the meetings with Russia as the chair of the Arctic Council. And we've all had some wonderful, everybody's had wonderful discussions and debates about that. But do you think that maybe that avoidance or that beating around the bush constantly about conflict and security might be working in the sense that the Arctic Council hasn't simply fallen apart? Or what does that pause? Perhaps it has. What do you think that pause has meant? And maybe what's the contribution of cooperation been to where we are now?
Yeah, I mean, that's real. The first real challenge for the Arctic Council and the cooperation between the 8 Arctic states. I mean, this is something that there's 7 Arctic states. I mean, which are now if Finland and Sweden will be accepted finally as NATO member state, then you have NATO Arctic, some sort of. Because of 7, and then you have Russia. But I mean, maybe that was exactly what that was the only thing what they wanted or were able to do because of the boycott and sanctions. And then they didn't want to stop the cooperation. So I have discussed within these few months with several senior Arctic officials of several Arctic states. And absolutely, they don't want to stop it, but this was the only option how they what they could do now. But then comes, of course, the question that how, I mean, like it's interesting if these persons who are in charge, if they would like to continue, but then they say that, but my minister, but I don't know about my minister. And of course, this is run by foreign ministers. and ministries, the cooperation. So, and this is putting me to think about what about many of these ministries or ministers, even governments, are they really valuing Arctic cooperation so much that they are ready to find a ways how to continue? I'm not sure. I mean, I hope, but I'm not sure. Because you remember what I said earlier, that they can't make the real priority between environmental protection and economic activities. And this means that they can't ask anymore to make another report or assessment, because we know exactly what we should do or what Arctic states should do. So they are hesitating to take that next step. They could do that today, tomorrow, but they hesitate to make that. And so this is now momentum for them really to have a thought that, well, are we ready to continue that? If we will find a way how to do that so that Russia is involved in. So this is, I don't know, this is some sort of very, very tentative thought what I have, but this is of course an important thing if you think that how to continue, how to find a common ground, because that is what they are looking for. I mean, they should. Search and rescue is one thing. USA is cooperating all the time with Russia about search and rescue in the Barents, in the Bering Strait area there, and Norway is cooperating with Russia on search and rescue with the Barents, because it's so important. Okay, that is common ground between these states. But then in general, what is common ground? It's very difficult to find a way, a common ground, what the government of Finland is now would like to have with Russia. I think it doesn't exist just now. But that is what we need to find that kind of even small step what they can make in order to continue. But then
and climate change is doing it.
No. I mean, because if it would be climate change, then it would happen. Mm-hmm. But of course, I mean, the damage has already happened because we don't have data. I mean, those who are, scientists who are doing climate science, they don't have data from Russia. And the Russian Arctic is half of the Circular North. I mean, it's already 7 months without data. And you need data all the time, new data. And then there are no joint projects with Russian scholars, scientists now, nothing. And that is another damage.
Are you hopeful?
Well, I am hopeful by that way that I know so many Russian scholars, particularly young ones, who would like to be international. Either they are still in Russia or they have left the country, it doesn't matter actually, because they would like to be involved in international scientific cooperation as Russians. And so, yeah, I lean on these young guys that they will make it better.
So maybe that takes us to we thought last night that we were kind of into talking about the next generation. Maybe that takes us into our next couple of questions as we finish up. What would you tell students interested in the Arctic to study, and what advice would you give them, especially given this situation? Don't study Russian data because it's not there.
Well, I mean, usually my first question is someone who would like to discuss with me about his or her research is that what is that issue that you are most interested in? And I mean that if he or she will give about that and about that and about, I said, oh, there are 3. I asked one. What is the most? And because I mean, then what is that? because I think that it's important to find out what is my main interest here, why I'm interested in. So often that, okay, the title is this and this. So I can say that, okay, I will find there 3 or 4 different parts in the title. So what of these is the most important for you? And then, well, it will come there after a while. So this is my advice, that work hard if needed to find out what is the most important thing and interesting thing for you. Maybe interesting is the right word here. And then, in a way, take that out from that context, and then try to look at why is this interesting, why this is so interesting to you, and then in a way that what is the motivation? Because I mean, if you do research or your study, you need motivation. So motivation is the driving force, but you have to recognize it. Why I am I'm interested in, and why I think that there is motivation to do this.
Okay, and then moving from there, you may not know that Lassi has developed a pedagogy that he has used for the last 2 decades. I would say 20 years ago.
30 years.
30 years, sorry. So I'm going to ask Lassi to tell us a little bit about the Claude Academy. And this is a booklet from the most recent Claude Academy, The Global Arctic Today, Cooperation of Power Politics, Fossil Economy, and Climate Catastrophe, Science and Indigenous Knowledge. That was the title of the whole book?
There are many elements from the studies of these young researchers.
Yeah. So how Claude Academy? Tell us a bit about that. What does inspiration come from? How has the Claude brought about a new pedagogy for circumpolar studies, and who can join?
Well, I mean, PhD candidates, advanced MA students can join, and also other experts on the field. So, I mean, who are interested in? Again, well, I mean, as I said, I was lucky to jump into a train just leaving from a station when I graduated, and became involved in that research project. So I try to do that easier for PhD students and young researchers today. I mean, a real introduction, 1 week, very intensive week going around the European Arctic. So different places there, but not as a tourist, but as a scholar who is interested in to know these different local and regional features, and meet local and regional experts and policymakers there, and who is ready in a way to leave his or her desk and library and go out there where is the life, and experience that, and appreciate the fact that the scientific community is part of a society. It's not any isolated community, and so that we as scholars, we are citizens, and that's why we should be open-minded toward other expertises, and also, like when we are traveling there, how the Sami people, the indigenous people there, are thinking about, and what is their indigenous knowledge.
Yeah. So we spent 10 days or something. Alta, Tromsø, and Lassi often takes the group to northern Russia, to Murmansk, but we couldn't do that last year. But how many miles does the Claude Academy go in? How many countries and how many miles?
Well, I mean,
kilometers.
Yeah, I think that it's about 2,000 kilometers, 2,000 kilometers, and then like 3 countries, 4 or 5 different regions, 9 different destinations, and then about same number of sessions there. So it's really intensive, but you have to realize that in like usually it's end of May, beginning of June, there is a lot of light. So there is daylight all the time. So that it is something that you can see whenever time of a day we are traveling. Mm-hmm. So you can see the changing landscape, and then it's not for to have to be sleepy and have 8 hours in a day good sleep. No, it will not happen. But it's very exciting, and that is one idea in a way to change the rhythm every now and then, to test students or PhD candidates, young researchers, that, well, I mean, come on, this is what in the real life you will face every now and then. You have to be ready. And I have to say they are. They very soon they learn that, and they are ready for that.
So if there's anybody certainly who's interested as a student, as a graduate student in traveling and learning more about the Nordic circumpolar region, that Kalad Academy is a wonderful, and as it's been going for 3 decades, it's an institution, and it's probably the only one of its kind, and certainly you get things that come and go. You get, I think students on ICE has done something similar for a number of years with going up on a ship. But as a pedagogy, taking graduate students, moving them around the North, having them go from place to place, talk, meet people, give presentations, and meet faculty is an amazing thing. And lastly, this is part of, just to kind of circle back, maybe to wrap this up, because we want to talk about the Arctic Yearbook for a second. This is part of sort of this whole cooperation that people forget that came out of Rovaniemi and the Finnish-Canadian ideas about environment, and the Arctic Cooperation, Arctic Council, Arctic, Northern Forum. These are all cousins, are they not?
Well,
this cooperation.
Yeah, exactly. I would say that it's some kind of ecosystem, which is like the Kalad Academy, the Arctic Yearbook, a few others. The philosophy is there that we don't want to be depending on institutions, and that's why it's based on individuals. Like the Kalad Academy, I mean, it's totally in our hands. It means, of course, challenges when we have to find funds for that every year. It's not always so easy, but so far we have managed. But at the same time, we have the freedom. And that is something that when these young PhD candidates, young researchers are there, they start to realize that, oh, okay, so that you can really do that without asking any permission. Yes, I said, exactly. And because we know that if you are depending on institutions, then it's becoming so slow, the process, and sometimes you are stuck. You can't do that, simply what you think that you should do. But I would say that the Kalad Academy is, first of all, a method. We don't want to build institutions without a real need for that in a way. And that's why we used to say that it's a method.
Yeah. And then there were other pieces to the Northern Forum, which was a conference scenario. It's still going.
No, the Northern Research Forum, no. It's not because the Arctic Circle assemblies are.
Oh, okay, yeah. So there's a number of different pieces. That's something that I wanted to talk about the Arctic Yearbook in a second, but I think this is something that people are beginning, this ecosystem of knowledge and how it operates to create this, also support circumpolar knowledge is something important, and that's another aspect of cooperation we don't talk about too much. Do you want to, okay, the last thing that we wanted to do today was that we were hoping to, Lassi does not have the full Arctic yearbook to bring with us because there are a few delays, but we thought we might just explain the Arctic yearbook. In 2010, you started, there it is, the thematic network for security and geopolitics for the U Arctic. You started the thematic network on geopolitics with U Arctic. So again, we're talking about these sort of knowledge pieces. And I remember you called people together and you said it's time to start thinking about geopolitics and security in the circumpolar region through this network. And remember, we sat in Copenhagen, a group of us, and the idea was, well, what do you do that's different besides just talk? And at that meeting, it was 2014, when the 2012 and then 2014 when the first yearbook came out, right?
Yeah. It was 2012, the first year.
Yeah.
And now we are almost ready with this year's Arctic yearbook, and the launch will be after 1 week. And so, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Arctic yearbook, but the idea is that everything is online. So, and this was the driving force when we came together in Copenhagen 2011, just before Christmas. And exactly we were thinking that what is needed. And then when after many of my students, PhD candidates came to me and said that, well, I mean, books are so expensive that even the libraries can't buy new books. And I said, oh, okay, I know. But if that is so bad that even libraries can't buy them, then we have to do something for it. And that was the driving force to establish something which is with open access. So the Arctic yearbook is online, but not only online, but also with open access. So because this is not yet time to launch, we will show only the cover of this year's Arctic yearbook. And as you can see, the theme is very, very current, relevant, whatever, the Russian Arctic, economics, politics, and people. But of course, very challenging. And that is maybe because we have to write the introduction so that we will really explain the starting point, what we have here, and what is the motive, what we have here. We don't want to have someone to say that you are taking a side. No, we don't take a side. And we decided this theme already end of last year, and that's why we continued. Even the war in Ukraine started in the end of February. So, but I mean, the Arctic yearbook is becoming, it is already the leading publication on a few fields, like on Arctic governance, international relations, Arctic shipping, and few others. And there are already, before this volume, 11 volumes, 10 volumes are out, and then this will be 11th volume, but there are already about 200 scholarly articles. And everything is there. It's a library. You go only there and find all the articles of the previous Arctic yearbooks. And then there are commentaries and briefing notes. So this volume will include 17 scholarly articles and 9 commentaries and briefing notes, written by Russian scholars and non-Russian scholars. Variety of people covering not only the Arctic region but many other countries outside the region. So this is something that, again, showing that we don't want to be depending on commercial publishing houses, which make big money, because they even charge authors nowadays that you have to pay. No, we don't charge. We don't charge the authors, we don't charge the readers, because this is exactly what like it should be. And I have to say that this is maybe one of the most innovative things what we have had in Arctic research within the last 15 years.
Yeah, it's so quick turnaround. So this, and who will write in this will be experts in the field, from all over the place. You'll get the most surprising, both scholars and policymakers and some politicians even. And the notion, it was launched, was it on the 20th anniversary of the Arctic Council, with the first yearbook being spoke about. So the full circle, Lassi, back to Murmansk and Gorbachev's Murmansk speech, which set off this round of Arctic cooperation that you've talked about tonight, and talked about not just the cooperation and the events and the activities, but then some of the institutions and implementations, the things that come out of that, and I think in so many ways how enduring it's been. So maybe rather than me ask you more questions, I should turn over to, thank you, and turn over to our audience and our audience on Zoom. 4 questions, and we're already there at the gate with Betsy.
I just have a question. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. I have a question about the radioactive waste sites that from I think it was the London Treaty in 1970 or something. The deep water sites that the nuclear powers agreed that they could dump. So is this something that is not a concern in the waters of the Arctic because it is so deep?
Well, no, it's not anymore that big concern. I mean, of course, what they did, it was, first of all, the Soviet Union in the Barents Sea, that they dumped nuclear waste there. I mean, because Barents Sea is rather deep. But also in currency, which is to the east from Novaya Zemlya, it's much more shallow. But I mean, the first thing was, and actually that was still in the Soviet time, they made an inventory where they have dumped them. So that was the first thing, of course, to know where it is. And that was distributed, they translated that into English, and then it was distributed internationally. For example, I got a copy of that document, and that was very, very unique document. This was mid-1990s. First, like USA hadn't published any this kind of document by then. So, and then Norway and USA started to assist Russia. They established Arctic Military Environmental Cooperation only 2 weeks after the Arctic Council was established. And that was for that purpose, to start to develop technology for that. And the funny thing is that during the Cold War, USA and the Soviet Union were so busy that they didn't think about that, how to clean up after a party. And then party was over. Oh, we don't have any technology for this. So then they started in cooperation to develop that technology. And of course, I mean, it was said that all Western countries are financing Russia because Russia is in trouble. Well, actually, that technology was very important for the USA as well, because they didn't have that technology. But I mean, if we today think about that, when we have, like I said, these blocks and block buildings and sanctions, well, I mean, this was rather much different approach. It was international cooperation, and only because of international cooperation, they were able to create that technology. And because of that technology, they were able to solve the problem.
So when you spoke of the Sami being worried about the quality of their water and the nuclear, it's not from the deep waste, it's actually from more like submarines that have sunk and waste that's been.
Yeah, but I mean, at that time, of course, this was, I mean, there was not any public information about that, but they saw only simply a Chernobyl accident was, radioactivity was taken by winds to the Arctic, to the European Arctic. And it was coming down because of rain, and then lichen adopted it. And then reindeers are eating lichen, and then human beings are eating reindeer meat. So then it came to the bodies of people, Sami and other people, Finns, Norwegians, whoever. So that was the main reason. But then, like even Sellafield. I don't know if you know where is Sellafield. Sellafield is nuclear reprocessing plant is in UK, just beside the Irish Sea. Yeah, and that was leaking to the Irish Sea, and then that radioactivity went up to the north, to the Barents Sea, and then come down eastern coast of Greenland back to Atlantic Ocean. So that was something that what they found out. It's not only because of Chernobyl, it's not only because of nuclear accidents, it's also because of Sellafield. It was closed. When this became big cry, international cry about this, then UK had to close it. So I mean, yeah, I mean, they can handle it now. Of course, it's a lot of work still, but I mean, that is a really good example that only because of international cooperation you can solve these big problems.
Any online questions? No?
I'll ask a question. You mentioned that the war in Ukraine effectively has stopped the outflow of data from Russian scientists. Were any Russian scientists traveling at the time when things closed up? Have any scientists left? If so, are you in communication with them?
Yeah, thank you. It's a really good question and an important question. Well, like I said, that we are based on individuals. So I mean, I'm cooperating all the time with my Russian colleagues. And they are members of the thematic network. They are authors of the Arctic Yearbook. They are participating in the Galat Academy. And we have had few academic gatherings in this year after the war started, where we have had few Russians. And these are those exceptional gatherings where you have Russians who live in Russia today. And because we would like to have the channels open, we would like to hear what they are thinking. We want that they will know what we are thinking. Because this is, I mean, in the long run, that is not good if we don't know what they are thinking and if they don't know what we are thinking. I mean, this is very classic, and this has happened earlier. And I'm so surprised that today policymakers and media thinks that this is exactly wise policy, but this is not wise at all. I mean, 7 months is already long enough to start to. I mean, I have studied what it is to start to make enemy pictures. Enemy pictures will become enemies. And then enemies start to be realized that then you have real fighting there. But I mean, the more you know, the less you are in a way affected by enemy picture building. Because no, I know these guys. No, this is not true. This is a stereotype or whatever. And so this is one driving principle for us. We would like to keep the channels open, and we do that. Of course, we are careful we don't want to put them into even dangerous situation. I mean, those Russians who are still there. And then it's up to them how much they would like to become involved in. But like I was just 2 weeks ago, we organized one workshop in Washington, D.C., and we had one of my Russian colleagues there. And actually, the funny thing, he's this semester, he's lecturing at University of Alaska, Fairbanks. No names.
Oh, okay.
So I mean, this is, and like, yeah, exactly in that workshop, I said, when it was asked from me that what is wise, I said, keep the channels open. Like, Washington, D.C., the White House is having a channel open to Moscow, the Kremlin. Absolutely, because they have to.
Yeah. And even I was just thinking, Lassi, to an answer, just partly an answer, although I'm not the person giving answers here, but Yearbook at first said no, I mean, this is what many institutions have done, they said no cooperation, no, we are ending any cooperation. And then about a week or two later, it's probably you can cooperate with individuals. But certainly in the Canadian context, if you're have any governmental funding, then you cannot work with Russians. I don't even think individuals at this point because of the government funding piece. But if you're not, the message is that individual cooperation is one thing, and it's fairly, and certainly that's the Yearbook, which is what there's about 200 institutions, including Trent and your institutions around the world belong to Yearbook.
A question from our remote audience. This person sees at least 2 instances where Yearbook programs prompt the development of larger, more visible bodies like the NRF or the earlier Circumpolar Universities Association. Do you think the Yearbook has a role to play to support a more generous interpretation of Arctic security?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. I think that Yearbook has absolutely a role there. But then of course, the problem might be that there are so many different thematic networks. I don't even count anymore that how many, but I would say too many because it's very fragmented. That who are those who are really in a way doing research on security and then kind of approach they have, comprehensive security approach or what approach or state-centered approach. But I mean, it's something that maybe now Yearbook can really have serious discussion about that, how to do that and how to implement interdisciplinarity. Because like Heather said in the very beginning, it's thematic network on security and geopolitics. It's both geopolitics and security. And one reason was that when I have done research on both, but I said, okay, we are saying today we will talk about security and tomorrow about geopolitics. Well, can't we discuss about the both today? And because it was so natural for us, and that's why we put them together. And we do that all the time. But of course, it is only one of there's many thematic networks that University of the Arctic has. But I don't know what the board or the council, what they are thinking about this. But I think it would be good if they would start to discuss about that. And it would be time for them to take some kind of, really take seriously environmental security and human security.
Another one, and then James has one.
Okay. In addressing barriers to implementation of solutions, you suggest an elite class that wishes to retain self-control, difficulty finding common ground at the state level, and ineffectiveness of the UN. Are there avenues around these entities, perhaps networks that can begin action on the ground and change the incentives for action She asks the thinking of the example of Indigenous networks in Canada that have organized and found allies that have pushed federal action.
Okay, thank you. I don't know that Canadian network, but in general, I would say that Arctic Indigenous peoples and their organizations, like the Inuit Circular Council, have played very important role. I mean, in the very beginning, like I said, the example with the Sami, but then the same ICC organizing cooperation across the Bering Strait already in the end of the Cold War, end of 1980s, then beginning of 1990s. And I mean, today, they are not happy with the current situation, not at all. So I would really encourage them to continue what they do if they have these networks and channels to develop them and deepen them. And I know that they are, and I share that concern, that they are concerned because if the 7 Arctic states do not want to have them to be involved in, because actually the negotiations have been only between the 7 Arctic states. They have not invited the Indigenous peoples organizations in these discussions. Like one of these representatives of Indigenous peoples, they have asked from me, or said, well, we don't know what they are thinking. I said, okay, I can say what I know. And okay, it's good to know. I didn't know that, was the answer. But I mean, it's really.
So the 7 meet, but without the Indigenous groups that were part of the 8.
Yeah. I mean, the 7 Arctic states are having this in this very rare situation. There are discussions in official, of course, but the representatives of the 6 Indigenous peoples organizations, they don't know what is going on, simply. And that's not good, because they are permanent participants of the Arctic Council. Of course, this is not a normal situation, but still, I think that it would be absolutely needed to keep them there and inform them, and also because they might have good ideas. If you read, for example, the Inuit Circular Council Declaration 2009 about resource sovereignty, it's an excellent declaration. I mean, they are redefining sovereignty. That is exactly what it's fascinating actually to read it, because this is exactly what we need here. And so whatever Arctic state it is, their representatives should listen Indigenous peoples. But like in Finland, I just before coming here, I was following the news of yesterday, and it came out, they were reporting that the government cannot agree about new law of the Sami parliament in Finland, because one of the parties cannot accept that. Here we are, and this is already the 3rd government who can't make a decision on that issue. I mean, yeah, here we are. So that they don't value that so much that they would really make everything in order to solve this kind of, and it's not a big issue, but it's not simply, it's not important for them. So this is the reality.
Is that over the song?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
because that is the law is all about that. I mean, because it's elected. The summer parliament in Finland is elected, so you have to have criteria who are the voters, who are allowed to vote.
One quick follow-up.
Okay, and then James,
Yeah, what would it take to get state organizations to invite Indigenous participation?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, someone, I mean, Indigenous people's organizations should make, should have their voices loud enough and demand that. and then those who are supporting them should also let the policymakers to know that they should invite. But of course, I mean, this is because this is in a way this is not normal situation. So this is something what the state representatives, they can do this. Simply say that, well, if that would be normal, then of course we would invite you. So I don't know. I mean, I cannot say better advice except that they have to demand that, because the jure, they have a right for it.
James, sorry.
Thank you very much for your knowledge and the fascinating discussion. This may or may not be an issue, but given the geopolitical realities of the Ukraine-Russia situation, what that's meant for 7 months, I'm just wondering about investigations reflected by scholars with the Arctic Yearbook or any of the groups you're associated with on China's global aspirations around shipping in the Arctic and things like that. Has that been added to concerns about Arctic policy, or has it always been there, or is it a peripheral issue?
Thank you. I mean, this is. I think this is something what has been rather much discussed in the recent years. No, they have not been always there. Actually, the international scientific community invited them there when it was the International Polar Year, 2006-2007. Then there was an invitation for all who are interested in to do research in the Arctic. Please join us. And then the Chinese said all. The Chinese Polar Institute said that yes, we will say that we will thank the invitation and we will join you. And then they did that and established a research station in Svalbard, and then started to do research in the Arctic. And then, of course, later came this economic interest because of LNG on the Yamala Peninsula. And then the Northern Sea routes, of course, to transport LNG back to China, but not only to China, to Japan and South Korea as well. Well, I would say that there have been rather much that kind of concern about that the Chinese are coming. But I would say that yes, they are there, but it's very much that one of the driving force is climate change. They would like to know how the Arctic climate is changing, because it has direct impact to climate in the mainland of China. And the same with India, by the way. It was in India where in New Delhi, some conference about 10 years ago, and I first time heard that from an Indian scientist who said that there is a direct connection between Arctic climate and the Indian monsoons. So that's why they would like to know more about it. The same is with China. They would like to know more about how that climate is changing in the Arctic. But of course, this northern sea routes, it's something that is interesting to them. And then energy from Russia, from the Russian Arctic. And by the way, there is one article about that in the forthcoming Arctic Yearbook. So I would say that this is rather normal thing. And I have never understood why it is something, why to be concerned on that. Because I mean, state sovereignty in the Arctic is very firm. I mean, the Chinese, they know that. I mean, they cannot simply, I mean, it would be totally silly to try to occupy anything or even resources, because they cannot. And even that now what is Anglos searching for, that who have Canada or Russia, who have a right to explore and exploit minerals in the seabed under the Arctic Ocean, so that it is between them, and China is not there. And then when it comes to open waters, if the ice will melt in the Arctic Ocean, then it's a new ocean. Then of course fisheries can be, and China is part of that. Is a party in that agreement what they agreed a few years ago.
The ban on several Arctic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So here China is playing by the rules as other actors. So again, I mean, I don't understand why to be concerned. And so what is often forgotten in the West, that China is first of all interested in the Antarctic, because in year 2048, that is very important year when it comes to the Antarctic. And that is the year when the current path of utilization of natural resources in the Antarctic will expire. And China has already established 4 research stations on the Antarctic. So 1 in the Arctic, 4 in the Antarctic. So most of the money goes there, not in the Arctic. But of course, what techniques, what equipments you can use in the Arctic, you can use in the Antarctic. So it's maybe easier to test some kind of things in the Arctic and then use them in the Antarctic. So, I mean, yeah, this is exactly that kind of mystification of national security that we should be concerned of. Oh, there is a ship. Oh, there is a Chinese flag. Well, I mean, come on. If that is national water, I understand that. But if it is an international water, it's very normal. And we are at the same time, the Arctic states are saying that, yes, the Arctic is for international, for all the scientists from all the countries who would like to do the research. So it's for international scientific community to do that. Yeah, I mean, that is like it should be.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions? Or I think maybe we're... Okay, I think we've kind of reached very good. We're almost to a minute. I want to thank you all so much for coming this evening. Lassi, I want to thank you because I think you can understand there's so much more. we could go on for 3 or 4 hours, but that's the next trip, right? And thank you so much, Lassi, for coming and sharing.